Okay, good to go, Jack.
Welcome to the chat, the New Bedford Live video for discussion forum. Today, my guests are Jane Gonsalves, former city councilor, and Tara George, an attorney in Greater New Bedford. The issue today is, should women be allowed to be festeiras at the annual Portuguese feast in November? This has been an issue that's been around a while. The Clube Madeirense S.S. Sacramento has had a tradition of not allowing women in. And despite efforts, at least I can remember back as far as 2014, before the 100th anniversary, women advocating to be part of the feast, the club that runs the feast. In order to do that, they have to first become festeiras to help running the feast. Of course, everybody knows that women do help run the feast. They cook the meals, they pour the Madeiran wine, they run the soda machines, they wreath the garland, they do everything, but they cannot be members. It's in recent weeks, 7 local women, all Madeiran women, have informed the feast club by way of a demand letter that they're tired of waiting. There was a vote last fall, and they want to join. And if they are not allowed to join, if the club does not move toward that in the next month, they intend to go forward with a lawsuit. So that's where we are today. Why don't you start, Jane, with anything that I've missed in framing this discussion?
Sure. So from our perspective, first of all, there was an effort made by a member back just prior to the 100th anniversary, as you mentioned, and that was rejected. He submitted a letter and that was rejected. But I had been asking, and other women had been asking, as far back as 1998. And that's a significant date because in 1998, the what we call the sons of mothers, which were the men who were mothers, who traced their ancestry through their mother's line. Prior to that, not only did you have to be a Madeiran man, your Madeiran ancestry had to be through your father prior to 1998. And at that time, they admitted the sons of mothers, which required a bylaw change. And so at that point, I began asking, when will the change be made to allow women? And we were always given the response, just be patient, it's going to happen. So now it's 26 years later, and a vote taken 3 months ago failed. So it seems like nothing's changed as far as the feast is concerned.
And you say it failed, but it was actually a 50-50 vote. Explain that.
Sure. So it even though it was a 50-50 ballot, it's kind of funny that there was a tie, actually. But their bylaws require that to change a bylaw, the group must have 75% of the people present voting to change the bylaw in order for it to pass.
I have to say, when I first heard about this issue back in 2013, 2014, I found it hard to believe, because I just thought, in this day and age, the women's movement was in the 1970s. Suffrage was 100 years ago, and it just seemed, I couldn't believe that things hadn't changed. And then some folks have pointed out to me, well, a lot of things haven't changed. I'm not Portuguese, I'm Irish, but the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick also haven't changed their bylaws, and they run a big event that we're having Sunday, the half marathon. So this is not just the Portuguese community. Tara, you're a local attorney, but you've actually worked at the feast for a long time.
I have. So I started in 1999. The Dave Pexoto is a very close friend of mine. He's almost like a second father to me. His grandfather started the feast. So I was introduced to the feast in 1998 because we went to visit him. He was president that year. He was the first son of a mother. And then in 1999, I had grown up with young Joe Souza, and his family has a baraka there, Baraka 10. And so I started working in there because I was not old enough to be able to serve wine and beer. And since 1999, I've given up, the 4 days of the feast, and then it's turned into more. I've gone on Sunday to the grounds and I've wrapped the arches that go over the street with bayberry. We make 180 gallons of sangria, Used to do it on the night before the feast. We now do that on Tuesday. I'm there grinding lemons. I'm there making the sangria. I'm there cleaning out the baraka. I've served on the scholarship committee. I've, cleaned up after the feast. I've worked at the food truck festival. I've worked at the country music festival. So it's been an integral, huge part of my life these last 25 years. And one thing to point out, I just mentioned that I was on the scholarship committee. So there are two other committees, according to the bylaws, that women are allowed to serve on. So the feast has a museum committee that is in charge of the operations of the museum at the bottom of the grounds. And women are able to serve on that committee. They're able to hold office. And then same thing on the scholarship committee. I was on the scholarship committee and I am a woman. There was many women on that, and there was many women that held office, recording secretary, chairperson. So it's just the feast committee that women are being precluded from being able to be a part of.
The guys that you work with every year, how do they feel about you being a member? To put you on the spot.
No. I mean, so Dave Pexoto has two biological daughters, and both of them filled out applications. And one of his nieces filled out an application. So, and other family members filled out applications. They are 100% in support of this. There are other family members that are related to that side of that family that are not in support of this. But the majority, I'd probably say 95 to 99% of my baraka is in support of this.
Baraka, what does that mean for those of us who are not Madeiran?
So a baraka is the booth basically that you go to, that you buy. So the Madeira wine baraka, that's where you go get your Madeira wine. Each of the barakas have numbers. So over the years, some are called number 10, number 18, number 15. So it's just our way of, knowing which kind of building you go to.
So just to reiterate, the rule traditionally up until 1998, as Jane pointed out, was that you had to be the son of a Madeiran father. And then in that time, they changed it. You could be the son of a Madeiran mother. Was that because they were running out of people? Well, why did they change that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
their membership was not growing at that time. And so and I had noticed, as a participant from the outside looking in, that whenever I attended, which was every year, the opening ceremony, I would be standing behind the festetas, the committee, and I would not know a lot of them. And that was because they would be coming from other parts of the country to serve for the weekend, but they weren't locals because they were trying to find people to serve. So,
and as Tara points out, many Madeiran men have only daughters, and so that they have no one to pass it on to, right, unless they have a son. We're using the term Madeiran, but just for those of you who are not totally up to speed on the nation of Portugal, the nation of Portugal consists of three parts, if I understand it correctly. There's mainland Portugal, and there are two autonomous regions. One is the Azores, and the other is the Madeira archipelago. And they're actually not that close to each other. Madeira is significantly south of the Azores. And this particular feast, there are many Portuguese feasts, as we know, but this is the biggest one, is a Madeiran feast. So I just want to put that on the record. I do want to say at this point that the chat did invite Timothy Rodrigues. I knew I was going to get that wrong. Timothy Rodrigues to be a part of this. Timothy is the president this year of Clube Madeirense. And we also invited Tony Abreu, who is running the feast this year. And Tony declined to participate, but he did send a statement, which I'm going to just take a minute to read now. And Tony is generally felt to be in support of the women joining. I just want to make it very clear that I'm a huge believer in equal rights for all, no matter sex, age, religion, sexual orientation, race, etc. I've been a member of the club for over 22 years, and it's a huge part of my family's lives here in the States. I grew up in a family dominated by strong Madeiran women, including two sisters who were born in Madeira. There's absolutely nothing that I'm capable of doing that they aren't due to their sex. I took on a leadership role this year in hopes of giving back to an organization that has been such an integral part of my family's lives. I'm very proud of the work that has been accomplished by our club. These accomplishments were only made possible by the work of our members, with the support of our families, women included. Unfortunately, the vote didn't turn out how I would have wanted, but something amazing was also voted on at that same meeting, and that was to donate tens of thousands of dollars to local nonprofits and organizations. I'm speaking today on my own behalf and in hopes that we all keep in mind how much we love the feast and find a way to move forward in a way where we can come together and not go against each other. So that I just want to put that statement on the record from Tony. Do any of you ladies have a reaction to that?
We appreciate his support. I have no question that he supports us at all.
I agree
Yeah.
100% with Jane. Tony's been wonderful. We have I've said this probably a dozen times, we have a lot of really great allies in the club that have been pushing for this, and Tony is absolutely one of them. So I'm very grateful for him.
Yeah. He does at the end say, I hope you all keep in mind how much we love the feast and find a way to move forward in a way where we can come together and not go against each other. That seems like a message to both sides, to the club members who don't want to change, and maybe the women who want to force a change. So, it just seems a little bit to me that he's sending a message. How did you come to decide that a lawsuit was the best approach, a potential lawsuit?
So the day of the vote, Jane and I spoke, and we were like, what are we going to do now? Jane has been a very vocal person about the feast and how this needs to change. And if it doesn't change, she'll be the one to take some sort of, I don't want to say aggressive action, but she's going to do something about it. For years, I've kept my head down. I've wanted to join in and open my mouth, but for years, I've kept my head down because I've seen men in the club speak up and then kind of become ostracized or not so beloved anymore. And I didn't want to lose those 4 days, right? I didn't want to lose that time with my other family. But when this vote did not pass and it was, 50-50 with one abstention, Jane and I sought out the advice of Attorney Beauregard Rayum, and we sat with her to see if we did have, a legal action here. I'm a bankruptcy attorney. I'm not, a civil rights attorney or a discrimination attorney. And Adrian, advised us accordingly that, we did have a case. And so at that point, Jane and I started kind of brainstorming what were we going to do. And that's when we solicited applications, and we had 12 women, including Jane and myself, that, had the fortitude to fill out an application and send it into the feast. And it was our hope that that would hopefully kind of stir the pot and get people talking about it. And it has, but it's not moving anywhere near as fast as we would like it to. So that's why the demand letter was sent.
We feel like we've exhausted any other option really at this point. We've tried to, we filed the applications in the hopes to get the conversation going and get some reaction from the feast and put it back on the front burner. But it's been stalled. There's a lot of discussion, but no official action has been taken since. And it's been 5 months since the vote was taken, and then it's been over 2 months, almost 3 months since we submitted the applications. So we see it as a last resort, but we feel confident. I was aware of the prior cases. Let me just say at this point. So there was a member of the feast, Seraphim Correa, who's an accountant in New Bedford, who was a longtime member, I had discussed this issue with many, many times. He had only daughters, and he wanted his daughters to serve with him. And he was very anxious that this move forward. And he kept saying to me, when is it going to change? What are we going to do? And at one point, he made a packet of materials of prior cases, discrimination cases in Massachusetts on the basis of gender, and gave them to me. And then sadly, he died 2 years ago. And so now I kind of feel like there's that obligation to finish what he started. And one of his daughters is one of the plaintiffs in this action, or will be a plaintiff if we file suit. There was the case that most people know about, the Lakeville Eagles case, where women were not allowed to be members, and that was resolved with the women becoming members. And then there was another case in Dennis at a municipal golf course where women were not allowed to be members, and that also was resolved in the women's favor. So there are prior cases in Massachusetts that indicate that, you know, the discrimination is not allowed if you have a public accommodation, meaning that you're inviting the public to partake in whatever your activities or whatever. So that's why we think that, you know, we have a case.
And that would be the feast, is the public accommodation.
Right.
Right. As in the case of the Friendly Sons, it would be the half marathon. So that was going to be my next question, is we all know of private clubs that organize themselves however they want. No women, even some clubs organize themselves for no ethnic groups and races. And that's legal as long as you're a private club and not in the sphere of public accommodations. So it is because the Feast of the Blessed Sacrament runs a public event that they have to be allowing members of all sexes, all races. You know, in other words, a person who was a Black descendant of a Madeiran father or mother would have to be allowed too, I assume, if they were voted on in the
Right.
The bylaws state, okay, you have to be a male of Madeiran descent. That's it. Prior, it's our understanding that the bylaws read much differently, right? When the first feast was held in 1915, the club did not incorporate until September 29th of 1953. And to me, that's important because if we go back to 1953 and we look at the rights that Jane and I would have had or not had, it's a different world. So the bylaws were written in 1953, and they've obviously been amended. And it's our understanding the original bylaw said you had to be a male of Madeiran descent through your father's lineage. You could not be divorced, and you had to be Catholic. So the divorced and the Catholic and the paternal lineage have been removed. The other thing is if we're looking at tradition, if you go to the village where this feast is modeled after, women are festetas. They have been. In 2005, young Joey Souza did a documentary called Festa, and he went over to Madeira. And when he was in Madeira, you know, he was looking into this issue, right? Jane was interviewed, and she can speak to that much better than I can. But when he went to Madeira, he found that women had been festetas for years. And I spoke to him recently and said, when did women become festetas? And he said they didn't really know, because it wasn't like this demarcation of we don't want women. It was kind of like, we're putting on this feast, all hands on deck, men, women, and it's, you know, it's acceptable over there. And almost 20 years ago, when he was doing this, you know, this documentary, they were shocked in Madeira that women couldn't be festetas. And here we are 20 years later, and I still can't be a festeta in this country.
So they got rid of the tradition of the patriarchal lineage. They got rid of the tradition of divorce, but they don't want to get rid of the tradition of women. So when they say it's all about tradition, they're picking and choosing which traditions they want to keep.
They also got rid of arguably the biggest one, which was that it was a religious festival. And there's not a lot religious about it now. There is a service on Thursday night, and then there is the mass on Sunday morning. But there used to be a procession. The priests used to march in the procession with the monstrance, you know, with the body of Christ. That was done at one time, and it's not done in this feast anymore.
Well, just since I've been here for 25 years, I can remember early on, there was a pastor who gave a speech that the feast had gotten too far from its religious roots. You know, I don't know whether that's true or not. It's really not for me to decide, but that has been on the table. We did get a question from a guy named Russell Paveo, I think, in Seattle, who he says he'll come and vote if someone will send him a ticket. So I don't know who's going to do that. Yeah, Russell Farrier, I'm sorry.
Oh, I know Russell Farrier.
Okay.
He is a member, by the way.
Yeah, and he says he'll come and vote on your behalf if someone will send him a ticket. I don't know. One vote's not going to get you to 75%. Let's talk about that 75% rule, because that seems to be what's keeping you. It's sort of like the U.S. Senate having to have 60 votes out of 100. It's just a hard threshold to reach. I've covered political bodies all my life, and I just think that kind of a high vote, there really has to be a consensus. Do you have to have a 75% vote to get rid of the 75% vote?
I'm guessing we do. We haven't, I don't know. We haven't checked the bylaws to that extent, but I don't know if it's in there, but I wouldn't be surprised.
I would assume, because it's a change to the bylaws, right? In order to change the bylaws, you need a 75%, pass. So how do you change the bylaws to say we don't want it to be 75%, we want it to be 2/3 or 51%, whatever it is. So I do believe in order to change anything in those bylaws, which would include getting rid of the 75%, you're looking at a 75% majority.
It kind of speaks to the mindset of the members of the club, or at least the leadership, that they would have such a high bar for making a change, because it tells me they don't want change.
Well,
So,
at some point they didn't want change.
yeah,
5% rule.
but no one's changed it. So,
but because if anybody knows whether you have to have a 75% vote to get rid of the 75%, please call in. We'd love to hear. We have a comment from Steve Piva, and he says, in so much as the Feast Committee is an offshoot of the club, as it is the Scholarship Committee, Museum Committee, and other committees, if women currently serve on those committees, is the club in violation of its own bylaws? In essence, if the club allows women on all committees except the Feast Committee, what is the rationale of those who don't support women festeras? So, again, it seems like they're picking and choosing traditions, and they're picking and choosing which committees you can be on. Well, why is this important to you guys personally? I don't have the 7 of you who wrote the letter, so I'll ask you to. Tara, why is this important?
So my biological family is not involved in the feast. My great-grandfather was a festino in 1932. My grandmother grew up down there. She married my grandfather, and he was from the mainland. They had my father and his brother, and they attended the feast. But then after my great-grandfather died, my grandmother stopped going, right? She found that it was difficult to kind of, it wasn't the same, she said. And so my father was not raised with, like I say, the magic of the feast, right? The love that I have for this and the people that have become a huge part of my life. So for me, it's important. Jane has said this, and I agree with her 100%. As a woman, I've done everything I want to. I'm an attorney as a woman, right? 50 years ago, that would have been a very hard feat to accomplish. And this is something that I want to do. This is something that is important. Jane touched on Serafim Correa, his daughter Angela. She is one of the potential plaintiffs, and she wanted to march down that street with her father, just like every other festado has done with his father, his brother, his nephews. And she, no matter what happens here, I will never be able to change that, because her father passed 2 years ago. She has a daughter. Her daughter wrote a letter that I presented before the board of directors. She wants to be part of the feast. But what happens is when your family passes away, the women that have volunteered for years kind of have trouble finding a home, right? And so I'm afraid that at some time in my lifetime, right, if the family that I volunteer with, they're all gone, I'm not going to have a home. I won't have a place there. That's number one. And number two is why can't I serve? If I had a brother, there is no difference between him and I. And I should be able to serve. And this is just, it's inequitable, it's discrimination, and it just needs to end.
I would think, what could be a prouder moment than for a Madeiran man walking down Acushnet Avenue with their daughter, who was carrying on the tradition. It seems like it would be a great family bonding moment. I know some people's parents have passed away. I think that's the case with you, Jane, but it seems like it would be, a real proud moment. Did you want to add something, Jane?
Yeah, well, in a similar vein, it's interesting that my father always taught us to be proud of being Madeiran. And it's interesting to me that, when you look at it population-wise, the Madeirans are a smaller group than any other Portuguese group in this area. And yet we run the biggest, and I will say we, even though I'm not a member yet, we run the biggest Portuguese feast in the world. So that's something to be proud of. My father was a member. He served. He was a vice president at one year in 1960. The last time he served was in the late 70s. So we were down there as kids a lot. As a rite of passage, like everybody else, we spent a lot of times down there trying to get drinks in high school. Of course, drinking age was 18 then. I've always considered the feast to be a homecoming every year. And to me, it's just beyond understanding why I cannot celebrate my heritage the way a man can. There's no good reason for it. And I've always fought against it and been pretty vocal about it. So that hasn't changed. That's how I feel. And now at this point in my life, my father's gone, and so is my niece. So now it's my brother, my sister, and I representing the family. And it's really sad that we'll never get to march with my father. So many festeiras tell that story about the first time they marched through the arches with their father. Well, that's gone now. He was still alive when I first asked this question, and now he's gone. So that can't be fixed, but I want it to be there, for the opportunity to be there for future generations too.
You touched upon something that has occurred to me just in my experience of the feast as an outsider. Is it almost seems like a big high school reunion for all of New Bedford. Like it's all the people that you went to school with, or all the people that you knew in your first job and haven't seen for 20 years. So it's kind of evolved from, and I'm not saying anything against the religious part of it. They should honor that, those that believe. But it just seems like the way it functions in reality is New Bedford's big summer annual reunion, and not to have women be part of that annual reunion. Maybe I'm not understanding it, but that's the way I see it.
I want to tell a story about, talking about the feast and the heritage. So I was asked what was my favorite feast moment. And it was the first time that I marched in a feast parade. And I was, a city councilor, and I was Madeiran. And that meant the world to me. And the public relations person for the feast, Ed Camara, when he would announce us, he would call me the Madeiran councilor, because even though probably the majority of the city council is Portuguese, I was the only Madeiran. And at some point he was told he was not allowed to announce me that way anymore. Wow. Yeah. So I'm still Madeiran though, regardless. That might be about the time that I had the buttons made. I had a stack of 200 buttons made that say daughter of a Madeiran, which I should have worn today. I don't know why I didn't put it on. Daughter of a Madeiran, to remind people that I'm Madeiran too, even though I may not meet the criteria of a festeiro as yet.
So we have a comment that's come in from Nicole D'Souza. Thank you, Jane and Tara, for being our voice through this. I truly can't wait to stand beside you serving at the festeira one day soon. Is Nicole one of the 7?
No, her sister is.
Her sister is, yeah.
She is she did apply to be a festeira. When we had to get the letter, when we decided to do the letter, we had to get an answer, yes or no, whether you were, interested and willing to put your name onto the letter. So I believe there may be some more women that will be joining the original 7.
Okay.
We actually have, I think, almost 30 applications. And one of the things we wanted to demonstrate with those applications was, there's been a lot of talk over the years that I'm the only one that cares about being in the club. In fact, a lot of women care. In fact, a lot more than 30 women care. We know many women who we believe are going to apply for membership once the law is changed, but they are afraid to speak out right now.
And this is a fairly small sized club. It's only a club of 300 members, and only 126 of them voted in the vote to bar women. So you're talking about 30 women interested in joining, and there's only 126 guys that voted in this last vote. The vote was, I think, 63 to 63. One thing that's come to my ear since I wrote the column is that there is some political undercurrent to some of this. That some folks are saying that this is part of woke culture, that this is just the latest attempt by women and gays and transgender people, and everybody's trying to, all these race issues and everything else. That this is just, woke people trying to force political correctness, on us. How would you respond to that?
I've been doing this for 26 years, so it's definitely not woke culture. And on my part, it's just, you can call it feminism, I guess, but if you want, but I just think there's no difference between me and the next guy and me and my brother, and I should have the same rights in the club and be able to join the club. It has nothing to do with woke culture.
Yeah. Tara, is this about liberals and progressives? Is that what this is about?
No, absolutely not. I have felt very strongly about this for years. I think if you go back in old feast photos, you'll see me wearing Jane's button, right? And I also had one that said Future Fish Data that Nicole Pexoto, made. This is something I've wanted to do, but I was afraid to speak out. And, I'm so fortunate that Jane came to see me on October 29th and said, what do you want to do? Because there have been times that I'm like, oh my God, like this is going to be divisive, right? And these are people that as Tiffany, one of the potential plaintiffs, these are men she's looked up to her whole life. These are men that I've worked side by side for more than half of my life. And so I don't want to hurt the club. I don't want to, walk on the grounds and people go, oh God, there she is. So for years, I've kept my mouth shut. But when that vote came down and when Jane said, what do you want to do? Maybe I'm older now, right? Because when this was happening, I was in my 20s and my 30s, and now I'm 42, and maybe I've grown a little bit more and I'm more willing to speak out for myself. I've always advocated for my clients, but knowing that I had her behind me, right? I was like, I'm in. And then knowing that Attorney Beauregard-Reum, that Adrian was behind us, even more in. And then as we started approaching people and more women were like, yeah, I'm in. Yeah, I'm in. Right. It bolstered our argument, and it just made me feel like, yes, this was now the time. This is not about liberalism. This is not about political leanings. This is about, there is zero difference, right, between Jane and her brother. And time is marching on. As we all get older, I find that, time passes so much faster. And, there's so many women that are worried about losing that opportunity. So I could continue to sit here and say nothing, or I could continue to, push for this. And that's where, the push came.
Okay, so we have a comment that's come in from Bill Texera, who I know has been involved with the feast for a long time. And he says, Mr. Donald Perry, Mr. Gabe Catino, Mr. Fernando Freid, Mr. Joseph Alves, Mr. Jimmy Souza, Mr. Dave Peixoto, Manny Betancourt, and me, Bill Texera, spent close to 2 years rewriting the club bylaws, and we're meeting once or twice a week to accomplish the task. In June of 1999, we completed it. I'm sure you all have a copy of the bylaws with some revisions, and it really should be revisited again. I take it you guys would agree with that it should be revisited.
Yeah, especially regarding that 75% number.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring up something that's also come to my attention since I wrote the column, and that is that the feast received, and correct me if I don't have this number correct, $250,000 in American Relief Act money, pandemic relief money, and that's obviously a government subsidy. Is that an issue if you have issues of discrimination, if you're receiving that kind of money?
I can't speak to the legalities of that. That's something that I would have to defer to Attorney Beauregard-Reum. But one can wonder.
I'll say this. I don't want to get into any conflict territory here, but first of all, that number is not the whole amount. There were two different grants that totaled $425,000.
Wow,
is what I was told.
What is this money for?
I think there was a facade improvement program, and also there was construction being done on the pavilion.
Well,
down at the museum, or the pavilion was being constructed at the museum, I should say.
Well, certainly things that need to be done and good causes, but that's almost $500,000.
Right. And all I can say is, generally speaking, the feast, I believe, would have had to sign some kind of grant contract or a grant agreement with the city of New Bedford, and as such, they have to confirm that they are not violating any federal or state laws, including anti-discrimination laws.
Yeah. So I'm being a little mischievous here. Since we're going to be accused of being woke anyway, I'll just pose the question: could a transgender man be a member of the club? I mean, if one applied, I don't know if there is one out there, but so that
Well, we haven't asked that question, so we
that
would.
person could. But no, you haven't. But I'm saying that person could be a member before you.
Yes, I
In
agree.
theory.
Right? Yeah.
I will tell you a story, though. I hope that the family involved, I won't use their name. One of the families that has members, has had longstanding involvement with the feast, had a member, Service Festedo, who was determined afterward. It became notice that I don't know what the word I want to use, discovered, whatever, that the person was actually adopted. And there was some brouhaha in the feast at that time about that.
Oh my goodness heavens! Like, what can they do? Just to be clear, Festera is a woman and Festero is a man with the O and A final vowel. So if this does proceed to a lawsuit, it could cost a lot of money and bring a lot of news, a lot of publicity to both the club and New Bedford. Are you guys able? Is Attorney Beauregard Room working pro bono? Or how are you guys going to afford this, and how is the club going to afford it?
Generally, when there is a case of this nature, if the plaintiffs are able to win and judgment is found for them, there are certain things that the court will allow, and there is an award of attorney's fees. So the defendant would have to pay the plaintiff's attorney's fees.
Now, there are other Portuguese communities in the United States. I mean, just nearby the Fall River in Providence, California, Hawaii. Are there any other Madeiran feasts in America? I know what feasts in Madeira allow women. Are there any other Madeiran feasts that are around in the United States?
I don't know of any that are specifically Madeiran.
Yeah, they say this is the biggest one in the world, right?
Yeah.
Okay, also from Bill Texera. I'm also sure some of you who are listening to or reading this correspondence are part of the Sons of Mothers, which proves to be one of the best events in a long time to the growth of our club. The new ideas and new innovative ways which you brought to run our organization have just been a great asset to our club. I, for one, thank all of you for all your hard work and especially your dedication to keeping our heritage alive. I believe Bill lives in Florida. He's been writing to me for years about the feast. He's a supporter of yours.
He is. He was actually the person that wrote the letter in 2014 or 2013 asking them to consider allowing women. So yeah, he has been a longtime supporter of this idea. So
one of the things that strikes me is that, and we just have you two here. You're a person with a degree in economics, Jane, a 20-year public official. You're an attorney, Tara. Then we also had, among the other 5 ladies, we had a nurse, someone who was a doctor of physical therapy, someone who was, Tara, help me here. You named them all for me.
So we have someone that is a clinical pharmacist. We have someone that's a histotechnician. I probably butchered that, so I'll apologize. We have someone that has their doctorate and is a physical therapist. We have myself, that's an attorney. Trying to think.
My sister's a nurse.
And then so there's a whole gamut. And when you look at the applicants as well, we have one applicant. She serves our country. And she wrote a letter for me to present to the board. And she said, if I'm good enough to serve and protect our country, why am I not good enough to serve in the club? So we're all accomplished women.
I just think of Jane. You have all this experience in the insurance industry. You have this experience with the YWCA, building a building. It just seems like all those skills are skills and talents that would make the club that much better. Now, people have said to me, well, it's not exactly running poorly. Why do we need them? But it could run a whole lot better. You bring in new ideas, a whole different perspective, it seems to me.
I find it interesting. One of the arguments against us joining is that we wouldn't be able to do things like lift the kegs or move the kegs and carry the wine and the wine barrels, or move the wine barrels and get up on the bucket truck and hang the greens, which Tara's already done, or cut the greens, which Nikki and Jenna have already done. They're plaintiffs as well. But yet there were so many other things involved in this feast that other people might have skills at, right? Providing security, doing planning, logistics, hiring entertainment, fundraising, because the feast, gets sponsorships, all those things people might have skills at. Like I have some skills like that. And, that's never considered. It's whether we can lift a barrel.
But if you at that argument too, though, right? How many of the older members, because there are members that are 18, because you're eligible to serve once you turn 18, to I'm sure in their late 80s, right? Early 90s.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to a 70 or 80 or 90-year-old, but I doubt they are lifting a keg, right? So if that's the bar, and I mean, I'm sure I could put a keg on a wheelie and move it.
Yeah.
But if that's the bar, and that's what we're saying, like women don't belong there, I disagree, because there are male members that could not meet that physical fitness test that some of these women could.
And as far as we know, they don't require a physical fitness test.
No, they don't.
Maybe they'll start when we get there. I don't know.
Yeah, it really is unbelievable. I will say that I've been struck by the silence of the area politicians, including the Portuguese American politicians. I think Ian Abu has said that he supports you, although I understand he was not at the vote. But at least he has said publicly he supports you. We've heard nothing from State Rep Tony Cabral, nothing from who is Portuguese, nothing from State Senator Mike Rodrigues. He's from Fall River, but certainly plenty of people from Westport and Fall River come to the feast. Mayor Mitchell, I haven't heard anything from. Where are the politicians? That's a hard question.
Let me say this. I have heard from some privately. We haven't actually put them on the spot and asked them, for example, to attend a press conference or a rally. But, I have concerns that the city of New Bedford allows an organization of this size to get in-kind help from the city, as well as funding through the ARPA program, while they are violating federal anti-discrimination statutes.
Yeah. Well, I just think when you're in a contentious issue like this, and clearly the club has been silent since you made your announcement, so that tells me that there is some resistance to doing what you've asked, that the vocalness of the politicians could only help you, and their silence, at the very least, is saying that it's not a priority of theirs, or they view it as too politically fraught with people on both sides of the issue to wade into. And so that makes me a little disappointed.
I agree with you. But what can I say? I can't, not everybody's as outspoken as I am and was when I was in office.
And that was one of your strengths, I will say. So just let me play devil's advocate for a second. You folks are not saying that there's not a place for an all-women's club or an all-men's club of some sort. You're just saying that this is not the right one. I mean, I think of our sister school in Nativity Prep. Those are, I went to an all-boys high school myself, and most of grade school. There's some people who say the genders learn better. We have the YWCA, Jane, where you were a member, has a specific mission, which is a little different than the YMCA. Is there a place for, all boy or all men or all women organizations?
I think there is. And I think the difference between that and what we're talking about relative to the feast is their mission has nothing to do with the empowerment of men or the education of men or anything like that. It's about the propagation of their heritage. and celebration of their heritage. And that heritage belongs not just to men. So that's the difference.
Absolutely. Tara?
The goal of the organization, their mission statement, is to put on the feast, this cultural celebration, right? And tradition is so important, right? There's a quote that says, you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. And so for a member to say, my son can serve and my daughter can't, what makes her less Madeiran? You know, I could see if this was, there was some sort of argument saying there's a reason why it's all men, but there is no valid reason. And again, if they want to hang their hat on tradition, then why are we still not celebrating the Blessed Sacrament? Why is there not a procession versus a parade? Why do I not have to be Catholic and undivorced? There are many club members that are undivorced. There's also many club members that don't speak Portuguese, and my Portuguese is not the greatest, but there are many members that don't speak any Portuguese. So to say that this is all about tradition, they've changed so much. So this is more about heritage, and it's more about, one of the letters said, this policy is teaching the next generation of women that they are not good enough to walk beside men, that their place is behind them. And that stuck out to me, because this policy is teaching more and more, generations and more families, by not speaking up, are saying, it's okay, your brother can do this, you can't. And it is a rite of passage for some of these families. Nicole, not to put words in her mouth, but she says, it was such excitement to turn 18, right? Because you can now serve the wine. But for her male cousins, they were able to walk down that street. For her, she was unable. So this is about heritage. It's not about so much about tradition. Yes, there are some traditions that we still hold to, but this is about a celebration of our heritage. And that should not be based upon your gender.
And again, when you say walk down that street, you mean walk with your father or your mother and be a full-fledged member of the
Right.
club.
I mean, I can be an escort for one of the male festejos. I've never done that, because I felt that if I'm going to, put on a dress and walk down the street, I'm going to do it as their equal, not as, accompanying someone.
Until the late 60s, the wives of the members were not allowed to even march with them.
Mm-hmm.
They were told they were marched behind the club members in the feast parade. And in I think it was 72, it might even have been later than that, was the first year they allowed women to get scholarships. Because I remember that, because it was right before I was eligible for a scholarship. And they changed it, the law changed, the rule for that changed right before it, in a couple of years before I was eligible.
Wow. So they literally had to walk in the parade behind.
Yes. We have pictures of my mother. Actually, there were pictures in the museum of my mother walking behind behind the men when he was the vice president.
God bless Fern. I knew her a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So are there any questions, any part of this that we didn't cover that you think is important to bring up?
I don't know. I think we covered a lot.
I think so too. I think the important thing is that we really hope that they do the right thing. We really hope that they bring this to a vote, and soon. And my fear is that they are going to bring it to a vote, right? They will be able to get that 50% to put it back on the agenda to take the vote, but they're not going to get the 75%. And then at that point, what else, do us as women do? There's nothing left to do at that point but then to file. And it is the consensus of our group that is not what we want to do. That is the last thing we want to do. And that is why we submitted the applications. I spoke before the board of directors on January 31st, and one club member, after Jane and I went there and spoke, and I presented letters from 10 different women, I said, a club member came to me and said, I'm sorry that you came, and I'm sorry that you've had to explain yourself, right? I stood there before the entire board and said, hi, you know me, I've been here for 25 years, right? This is what the feast means to me. This is what the feast means to these, 10 other women that took the time to write a letter. And that club member apologized to me. And Jane made a very valid point. No other male member has ever had to go before the board of directors and plead their case like we did, right? So I feel that we have been more than accommodating, giving them time. I'm not even talking about the last 26 years. I'm talking about, since this vote failed, if we didn't care about the club, if we wanted to make, if I had an agenda, someone said that, on WBSM, that the women have an agenda. If I had an agenda and I'm trying to make a name for myself, I wouldn't have spent hours in the last, dozens of hours in the last couple of months, spending a Thursday night at the club, pleading our case. This, we have done everything that we could to try and get the club to step up and take the vote and allow women to come in. And I say allow, and that's not also the correct word, because I shouldn't be allowed to come in. I should be welcomed in.
Right.
Agenda. Of course you have an agenda. The agenda is you want to be part of the club. I mean, that's it.
It was suggested that we have some kind of secret agenda, but of course they never said what that was. So I'm not sure what was meant by that.
Women to be treated equal. That's radical.
Well, yeah, I've been saying that for a long time too.
I have one more question, and maybe we'll come in before we close. What is it? Russell Farrier, you've read the bylaws. I have not. What's required in the bylaws? Vote, simple majority. Yeah, Russell is 3/4. It's 75%. All right. Thank you very much, ladies. Jane Gonsalves, former city councilor for 20 years. Tara George, attorney around town, and proud Madeiran women who would like to be members of Clube Madeirense S.S. Sacramento. Thanks for being my guest on the chat.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Happy to do it.